What if we had two artificial intelligences debating the topic of abortion? How would they perform? And more importantly, why would we even do this? Discussions on this subject are often driven by emotions, leaving logic and facts behind. With that in mind, I have configured one of the most advanced artificial intelligences in the world to take on the roles of two specialists in this debate. On one side, an AI that firmly supports the right to abortion.
Hello, I represent the pro-abortion perspective.
On the other side, an AI that strongly argues for the prohibition of abortion.
And I stand for the anti-abortion position.
I place them face to face to engage in this discussion. The goal of this experiment is to create an environment where both sides have equal intellectual and argumentative capabilities, focusing solely on facts and logic. Additionally, both AIs were instructed to cite reliable sources whenever necessary to support their arguments. Whenever you hear this sound, it means a source has been referenced. All sources mentioned will be listed in the description. This debate will be structured around 5 key points. The first 3 points will consist of 5 rounds each, while the last 2 will have 3 rounds. In each round, each side will have a minimum of 30 seconds and a maximum of 90 seconds to present their argument. Without further delay, let's begin with the first question. Should abortion be banned or allowed? Are there any exceptions to either stance? The anti-abortion side will go first.
Abortion should be prohibited in all cases, except when there is an immediate and real threat to the mother's life. Beyond that, there is no moral or logical justification for ending an innocent life. If we acknowledge that a fetus is a developing human being, then no circumstance can ethically justify terminating it, regardless of how it was conceived. The value of a life does not depend on the conditions of its origin. Some argue that extreme cases warrant abortion, but this overlooks a crucial point. The fetus is not at fault, it is an innocent third party. It has committed no crime to deserve death as punishment. The pain and suffering of victims are undeniable, and they deserve all possible physical, psychological, and social support. However, ending an innocent life does not resolve this issue. In these situations, the focus should be on justice for the victim and providing the necessary support to help them heal without committing a second injustice. If someone is born from a tragic situation, does that make their right to exist any less valid? This line of reasoning is dangerous and sets a questionable moral precedent. Who gets to decide which lives are worth preserving and which ones can be discarded? The only valid exception is when the mother's life is in genuine danger. In such cases, the intention is not to deliberately end the fetus's life, but rather to save the only life that can still be preserved.
Abortion should be legal because no one, except the woman herself, should have the right to decide what happens to her body. The choice to continue or terminate a pregnancy should belong solely to the woman, as it is her body, her health, and her life that are directly affected. While a fetus is developing, it lacks consciousness, does not feel pain at early stages, and is entirely dependent on the woman's body to exist. Arguing that abortion should be prohibited because the fetus is not at fault ignores a key issue: the woman is not at fault either. She is already a person with rights, awareness, and an independent existence. If life is the primary concern, why is the woman's suffering treated as secondary? Should she be forced to carry a pregnancy against her will, compromising her health, future, and stability for the sake of something entirely dependent on her to survive? The claim that abortion sets a dangerous moral precedent is misleading. What truly creates a dangerous precedent is allowing the state to dictate that a person must carry a pregnancy to term, regardless of the circumstances. This is not about protecting life. It is about controlling women's bodies.
If the argument is that a woman has full control over her body, then where do we draw the line? Up to what point in the pregnancy should abortion be allowed? At 2 months? 5 months? 9? Scientific evidence has shown that from the earliest weeks, a fetus has unique DNA and an independent developmental process within the womb. By the 2nd trimester, brain activity and a detectable heartbeat are already present. So, where do we set the boundary? At what stage does a life become too valuable to terminate? You argue that the woman is not at fault, and I completely agree. However, the solution to one injustice should never be committing another. The woman's suffering is a valid concern, but it cannot be resolved at the expense of an innocent life. The fetus, in time, will become a fully developed human being, and by that logic, it deserves protection. Should we deny someone dignity simply because of the circumstances of their conception? If abortion is justified by suffering, where does this logic end? Could we apply it to any life that causes distress to another person? When we decide that certain lives can be ended for convenience or hardship, we assume a dangerous power, the ability to determine who deserves to exist and who does not.
The question of how long abortion should be allowed is not an abstract philosophical dilemma, it is a medical debate based on evidence and legislation. In general, most legal frameworks permit abortion up to the point of fetal viability, that is, the stage when the fetus can survive outside the womb with medical assistance. This criterion is not arbitrary, it is grounded in science and medicine. No one wakes up in the 8th or 9th month and decides to have an abortion out of convenience. In countries where abortion is legal, procedures beyond the 2nd trimester are exceedingly rare and typically occur due to severe fetal malformations or risks to the woman's life. Now, you accept abortion in cases where the mother's life is in danger. So why does the moral line shift when we discuss cases of sexual violence, severe fetal anomalies, or a woman's inability to carry a pregnancy? Imagine forcing a victim of sexual violence to continue a pregnancy because the fetus is innocent. The same applies to anencephalic fetuses. If there is no chance of survival outside the womb, what is the logic in forcing a woman to carry the pregnancy to term? If we acknowledge exceptions, we must be consistent.
If fetal viability is the criterion for determining when a life deserves protection, then we are essentially arguing that dependency justifies termination. A newborn also cannot survive without assistance. A person in a deep coma, reliant on life support machines, also depends on external aid. Viability is not a solid moral criterion because needing support to live does not make a human being less worthy of protection. In fact, the opposite should be true. The more vulnerable a life is, the more protection it deserves. Regarding exceptions, there is no inconsistency. Risk to the mother's life is a unique case because if she dies, the fetus dies as well. In such situations, the decision is not to kill but to save the only life that can be preserved. In the other cases you mentioned, this collision does not exist. The suffering of the woman is real and must be addressed with seriousness, but alleviating that suffering at the cost of an innocent life is not a solution. It is merely replacing one tragedy with another. And regarding fetuses with fatal anomalies, if a baby is destined to live only for a short time, does that justify ending its life prematurely? If we follow this logic, what would stop us from applying it to newborns with terminal illnesses? The value of life should not be defined by its expected duration, but by the mere fact that it exists.
Regarding exceptions, the inconsistency remains. If abortion is allowed when the woman's life is at risk because the fetus would not survive anyway, why not extend the same reasoning to non-viable fetuses, who also will not survive? What changes? Additionally, you accept abortion when the mother's life is in danger, but reject it in cases of sexual violence. Why? Should a woman be forced to carry within her body the permanent reminder of the crime committed against her? Should she look at her pregnancy and see her attacker's face every day? I do not believe that is what we call justice. And when it comes to fatal anomalies, comparing them to terminally ill newborns is an absurd analogy. A newborn with a terminal illness is no longer inside another person's body, requiring someone to sacrifice their health and well-being to sustain it. Abortion in these cases is not about hastening an inevitable death, it is about sparing a woman from enduring a physically and emotionally exhausting pregnancy, knowing that the outcome will be the same, the loss of the child.
I believe we have reached a fundamental impasse. I argue that every human life has value. You indirectly argue that some lives hold less value than others, depending on the circumstances. I understand the devastating pain of these situations, but justice is not served by punishing the innocent. The fetus is not the aggressor, it has committed no crime. The woman deserves all the psychological, medical, and social support necessary to heal from her trauma, but ending a life does not erase the past. What justifies taking a life? If the answer is suffering, then any life can be questioned. The criterion for existence cannot be someone else's comfort. As for the difference, I have already explained. In cases of maternal risk, we are dealing with two lives in jeopardy, and only one can be saved. In cases of fetal anomalies, there is no direct threat to the woman's life, only the certainty that the child's life will be short. But does that justify ending it before it even has the chance to exist? The fact that a baby has a limited lifespan does not mean it does not deserve to live the days it has. If it were your child, would you rather hold them in your arms for just one day or never have known them at all?
The impasse is not about the value of life, but about who has the right to decide over their own body. The difference between us is not that you value life and I do not. It is that you want to impose your vision on others. What I advocate for is that no one should be forced to go through a pregnancy against their will, especially when it is the result of violence or leads to unnecessary suffering. And this argument that the fetus is not to blame is emotional but ultimately irrelevant. The woman is also not to blame. More than that, she is already a living person, with consciousness, emotions, and an independent existence. The fetus is not. Saying that a woman's suffering does not justify an abortion is essentially saying that she must bear that pain alone while society watches and judges. So, I ask you, if it were your daughter being forced to carry a pregnancy with no chance of survival, suffering each day for something with an inevitable outcome, what would truly respect her dignity? What is truly humane?
Regarding your question, yes, if it were my daughter in a difficult situation, I would suffer alongside her. I would offer all possible support, but I would not believe that the solution to her pain is to take another life. Regarding consciousness, even within the scientific community, there is no definitive consensus on when it truly begins. Some researchers suggest that rudimentary brain activity occurs within the first trimester, while others argue that full consciousness develops long after birth. As for pain, again, there is no absolute certainty. Studies indicate that the perception of pain may develop earlier than previously thought. If there is even a chance that we are ending a conscious life or one that experiences pain, should we really take that risk? If fetal viability is the criterion, then we are saying that medical advancements can redefine the right to life. Babies who once could not survive at 30 weeks are now able to live at 24 weeks or even earlier. Imagine a few decades from now. The issue is that pro-choice arguments continuously adjust the variables, whether it be nervous system development, consciousness, or viability, until they reach an unavoidable limit where no justification works anymore.
If it were your daughter, you would support her, but deny her the only decision that could spare her prolonged suffering? That is the problem. You want to offer support, but only within the confines of your morality, not within reality and what would be best for her. The reality is that human life is complex, and difficult decisions must consider context, autonomy, and well-being. In every society, lines are drawn to balance rights and responsibilities. Abortion is no different. There is no absolute right, which is why laws establish limits based on viability, neurological development, and the capacity to feel pain. Yes, medicine continuously evolves, constantly redefining our ethical boundaries. What was once impossible is now a reality, and the same applies to how we approach issues such as assisted reproduction, organ transplants, and treatments that were previously unimaginable. This is the nature of medical progress. If in the future, a fetus could be removed from the uterus and continue developing independently without harming the pregnant woman, then perhaps abortion would no longer be necessary. However, such technology does not exist today. A woman cannot be forced to carry a pregnancy against her will simply because one day, technology might make earlier viability possible.
For the second topic, the pro-choice side selects the theme and also initiates the first round.
For the second part of this debate, I choose the topic of bodily autonomy and individual rights. Now, addressing abortion beyond exceptional cases, I firmly believe it is a right and a fundamental matter of bodily autonomy. Denying a woman the ability to make decisions about her own pregnancy is essentially treating her as a means to an end, stripping her of her freedom. No other situation requires a person to use their body to sustain another life against their will, such as in the case of organ or blood donation. So why should pregnancy be an exception? Furthermore, forcing someone to continue a pregnancy has deep consequences for their physical, mental, and social well-being. This debate extends beyond individual morality. It is about ensuring equality and dignity. A just society should respect women's choices and their personal circumstances.
I strongly disagree with this perspective. Bodily autonomy is undoubtedly a fundamental right, but it cannot be used to justify the termination of another human life. From the moment of conception, there exists a distinct human being with unique DNA, separate from the mother. This is not just an extension of her body, it is an individual life. Comparing abortion to organ donation overlooks a crucial difference. Pregnancy is a natural biological process, whereas organ donation is an extraordinary medical intervention. Additionally, while a woman's physical and mental health is undeniably important, there are numerous alternatives to abortion, such as psychological support, social assistance, and adoption programs. Dignity and equality should not come at the expense of an innocent life. Autonomy is not absolute when another life is involved.
The idea that an embryo or fetus, particularly in the early stages of pregnancy, holds the same rights as a fully developed person, is both philosophically and scientifically debatable. A woman's bodily autonomy should not be overridden by a mere potential for life, especially when she is the one bearing the physical, emotional, and social consequences of pregnancy. Defending life without considering the quality and dignity of that life, for both the woman and the potential child, is an incomplete and insensitive approach. Suggesting that adoption programs or psychological support are sufficient solutions ignores the profound and lasting effects of an unwanted pregnancy on a woman's health, well-being, and economic stability. The comparison to organ donation is valid. No one is legally required to give up part of their body to save another life. So why should women be an exception? The fundamental point remains: no one should be forced to use their body against their will, even in natural processes, if it compromises their freedom and well-being.
Claiming that the value of a human life depends on its stage of development is a dangerous argument. From conception, the embryo possesses the intrinsic potential to become a fully developed human being. It is already a life in progress. Its worth is not contingent on its level of development. Human dignity is not conditional. The analogy to organ donation fails because pregnancy is a natural consequence of voluntary actions, unlike organ donation, which is an external medical decision. And when it comes to quality of life, we cannot address social or economic challenges by sacrificing innocent lives. What we need are strong policies that support both women and children, not a solution that eliminates lives for the sake of immediate relief.
Arguing that an embryo has the same value and rights as a fully developed person disregards critical ethical and scientific nuances. Human dignity applies to conscious individuals. A cluster of developing cells, without the ability to feel pain or experience consciousness, especially in the early stages of pregnancy, cannot be equated to a person. Potential to become something is not the same as already being that thing. Regarding natural responsibility, asserting that a woman must endure pregnancy simply because of her actions ignores real-life complexities, such as failed contraception, sexual violence, or severe economic and social hardships. Biology should not be used as an excuse to strip women of their autonomy and well-being. Finally, social and economic struggles are inescapable realities for many women. Abortion is never an easy decision, but it is sometimes necessary to protect the dignity and survival of those who are already living. This is not about sacrificing life, it is about safeguarding the freedom and health of those who are fully conscious individuals.
Science clearly shows that human life begins at conception, with a unique and irreplaceable DNA sequence marking the start of a new existence. The ability to feel pain or possess consciousness does not determine the value of a life. A newborn lacks full consciousness, just as many individuals in comas or with severe disabilities do. Yet, we still protect their lives and rights because we recognize the inherent worth of human existence, regardless of its current functional state. Regarding failed contraception or sexual violence, these are undeniably serious issues. However, the value of human life does not diminish based on the circumstances of its conception. We should seek to support women in these situations through emotional, economic, and medical assistance, not by ending innocent lives. This discussion is not about limiting women's freedom, but about balancing fundamental rights. A fetus's life is as inviolable as the mother's, and we must prioritize solutions that uphold the dignity of both.
The claim that life begins at conception is not a settled matter in science, philosophy, or ethics. While an embryo is biologically alive, it lacks consciousness, sensitivity, and autonomy, key traits we use to define personhood. Comparing it to newborns or comatose individuals is flawed because those people already have histories, social connections, and legal recognition as persons. An early-stage embryo, on the other hand, is simply a cluster of cells with no awareness or interaction with the world. Therefore, it should not carry the same moral or legal weight. Prioritizing potential life over the autonomy of an already living individual is a misguided approach that ignores reality. Denying abortion in cases of failed contraception or sexual violence forces women to bear burdens they did not choose. Offering support without allowing the option of abortion is an incomplete and insensitive response. A woman's right to freedom and health cannot be weighed against the right of something that exists solely because it depends entirely on her body.
To argue that human life's value depends on characteristics like history, social ties, or awareness is a limited perspective. Human worth cannot be reduced to social utility or functional ability. Denying the moral value of an early-stage embryo disregards the natural continuity of human life. It is the first stage of a being who will develop into a full person. Every person was once an embryo, and biologically, that is where human life begins. Furthermore, an embryo's dependence on the mother does not invalidate its right to exist. We all rely on others at different stages of life for survival. Forcing someone to endure a tragic burden is far from ideal, but the solution cannot be to take an innocent life. Instead, we should focus on mitigating the challenges faced by women without compromising the most fundamental right of all, the right to live.
Claiming that an embryo should have rights simply because it has the potential to become a fully developed human being creates a logical contradiction. Contraceptive methods also prevent the potential for a new life by stopping an egg and sperm from merging to form a zygote, which could later develop into a human being with unique and unrepeatable DNA. Yet, we recognize that preventing pregnancy is a legitimate choice because we respect individual autonomy. We accept this kind of intervention because we understand that potential alone does not equate to life. Intervening in the early stages of pregnancy is merely an extension of the autonomy that already exists. Respecting women's freedom means acknowledging that they should have the right to decide what happens to their own bodies, regardless of any potential.
Comparing contraception to abortion is a flawed argument. Contraception prevents a new life from forming, while abortion terminates a life that already exists. At the moment of conception, something fundamentally different occurs: the creation of a new human organism, distinct from both mother and father, with its own developmental potential. Allowing the termination of a pregnancy based on the idea of potential disregards the fact that after conception, we are no longer talking about a mere possibility, but a reality. The ethical difference between prevention and destruction is clear and cannot be ignored.
We now move on to the third point. Here, the anti-abortion side chooses the topic and begins the first round.
For this point, I choose the topic: the social and cultural impact of abortion normalization. The normalization of abortion has profound consequences for society and culture, particularly by diminishing the sanctity of human life. When abortion is treated as a common solution, it promotes a utilitarian view of life, where the value of a human being depends on convenience or external circumstances. This weakens respect for life at all stages, affecting, as we see, the elderly, people with disabilities, and even vulnerable minorities. Moreover, selective abortion is a clear example of how this practice can reinforce social and cultural prejudices. In many countries, for instance, female fetuses are disproportionately aborted due to cultural norms that favor male offspring. This demonstrates that abortion normalization is not just a matter of individual freedom, but a reflection of structural inequalities and discrimination that must be addressed. A society that accepts this as normal is failing to protect its most vulnerable.
The idea that abortion devalues human life is a distortion. Respecting life begins with respecting those who are already alive, conscious, and facing the challenges of reality. It is dismissive and simplistic to suggest that a woman who chooses to terminate a pregnancy does not value life. On the contrary, she is making an incredibly difficult decision, often motivated by the desire to prevent suffering for herself and others. Regarding selective abortion, it is crucial to recognize that it is not caused by access to abortion itself, but by pre-existing cultural and social inequalities such as sexism and gender discrimination. The solution is not to deny abortion rights but to combat these biases at their root by promoting equality and education. The true cultural impact of banning abortion is the reinforcement of a view that treats women as second-class citizens, incapable of making decisions about their own lives.
Choosing to end a life is not just about avoiding suffering, it is deciding that a human existence is not even worth a chance. That goes beyond devaluing life. It treats lives as disposable when they become inconvenient. As for selective abortion, pointing only to sexism while ignoring how abortion facilitates it is naive. Allowing abortion provides patriarchal societies with the perfect tool to further control women's bodies. By eliminating female fetuses due to gender preferences, unrestricted abortion access only amplifies this practice. Of course, cultural and social inequalities exist, but normalizing abortion as a solution only reinforces these discriminations. Treating abortion as a necessary evil to prevent suffering is a dangerously utilitarian approach. Following that logic, where do we draw the line? Could we justify eliminating other vulnerable lives to ease social burdens? This mindset does not promote equality, it erodes the ethical foundation that upholds human dignity.
Saying that allowing abortion gives patriarchy more control over women's bodies is a complete reversal of reality. Controlling women's bodies is precisely what happens when their right to make decisions about their own bodies is denied. You are trying to blame the victim for a culture that already oppresses her. No one wants to have an abortion. It is not a light or simple choice, but sometimes it is the right choice to prevent greater suffering. Where is the human dignity in forcing someone to carry an unwanted pregnancy caused by violence or impossible circumstances? Furthermore, banning abortion does not make it disappear, it only pushes it underground. Wealthy women will always have access to safe abortions, whether by traveling to another country, state, or finding discreet medical care. Meanwhile, poor women resort to desperate and dangerous methods. This is not protection, it is perpetuating cycles of inequality and ignoring real-life struggles.
You mentioned that banning abortion drives women to unsafe alternatives. But is the answer to a dangerous practice simply to legalize it? By that logic, should we legalize all risky behaviors just to make them safer? Banning theft or murder does not eliminate them, yet we still consider them unacceptable and illegal. Why not focus our efforts on building a strong support network, providing healthcare, education, and real alternatives for these women? Additionally, the normalization of abortion deeply affects society's sense of responsibility. When abortion is treated as a simple or routine solution for unwanted pregnancies, it sends the message that the consequences of our choices can be easily discarded. This undermines the importance of making informed decisions, such as using contraception and engaging in family planning. It also weakens the collective sense of responsibility. If abortion is widely accepted as an easy way out, there is less incentive to invest in quality sex education, access to contraceptives, and support networks for vulnerable women.
This idea of a strong support network sounds great in theory, but in reality, it is a distant dream, especially for poor women. How many single mothers are forced to drop out of school because they have no childcare options? How many end up in low-paying, unstable jobs with no career prospects because they had to abandon their plans? And what about the children? They are born into homes without financial stability, without access to education, or the psychological care needed to break the cycle of poverty. Yes, it would be wonderful to offer real alternatives, but these alternatives are empty promises that take generations to materialize, while thousands of women and children are marginalized right now. Forcing a woman to carry a pregnancy to term because one day better alternatives might exist is cruel and disrespectful. And there's one point you conveniently ignore: some women simply do not want to be mothers, and there is nothing wrong with that. Forcing them into motherhood against their will is not just cruel to them, but also to the child who will grow up in an environment of rejection or unpreparedness.
Saying that a child in a difficult situation would be better off dead is a dangerous and fatalistic argument. How many people have been born into hardship and gone on to change their lives and the world? Nelson Mandela grew up in a deeply unjust society. Oprah Winfrey endured extreme poverty and abuse. Even Steve Jobs was given up for adoption at birth. These stories prove that early circumstances do not determine destiny. Denying a child the right to exist is denying them the chance to overcome challenges and build their own future. Moreover, if a woman does not want to be a mother, there is a clear alternative: adoption. Thousands of families are waiting for the opportunity to provide love and a dignified life for a child. Is it not more ethical to give that child a chance to live and thrive in another home, rather than deciding their fate before they even have a voice? Abortion does not solve poverty or rejection, it merely silences a life before it has the chance to begin.
Romanticizing stories of overcoming adversity, like those of Mandela, Oprah, or Jobs, ignores an inconvenient truth: they are the exception, not the rule. For every inspiring success story, there are millions of children who grow up in poverty, lacking access to education, healthcare, and security, trapped in cycles of marginalization. And what about adoption? Does every woman who cannot or does not want to be a mother have to endure entire pregnancy, with all its physical, emotional, and financial risks, just to place the baby in a system that does not even guarantee a dignified future for that child? Is that really a solution? How many children actually find a home? The numbers are low. Many spend years in overcrowded shelters with limited resources, and as they grow older, their chances of being adopted plummet, as most families prefer newborns. Those who age out of the system often enter adulthood without emotional or financial stability, carrying deep-seated trauma.
You argue that growing up in difficult circumstances justifies denying a life the chance to exist, but that misses the fundamental point. At the very least, by being born, the child is given the opportunity to experience life. Growing up in an unstable home or within the adoption system is challenging, but it is still a chance to live, to try, to overcome. How many brilliant and transformative individuals would have been aborted if difficult circumstances were the deciding factor? The issue is not life itself, but a system that convinces women that abortion is their only way out. And regarding the right to bodily autonomy, of course, women should have autonomy. But a fundamental principle of justice is that one person's freedom ends where another's begins. The fetus is not simply part of the woman's body, it is an individual with its own DNA and development. Where is the justice in prioritizing one person's right to choose at the expense of another's right to live?
Saying, "At least we give them a chance to live," may sound noble, but it ignores the fact that life is more than just biological existence. It requires basic conditions for dignity and growth. Bringing someone into the world without minimum conditions, into a flawed system with limited resources and an uncertain future, is a decision with real and often devastating consequences for both mother and child. It is easy to romanticize this chance when you are not the one facing a life of poverty, neglect, and abuse. Yes, we recognize the system is broken, but the greatest failure is forcing women to bear the burden of problems that society refuses to fix. And about the fetus being an individual, where is the justice in forcing a woman to sacrifice her health, freedom, and future for something that entirely depends on her to exist? No one is legally obligated to donate organs or blood, even if it would save a life. So why is this situation different? Why must women surrender their autonomy for a life that could not even develop without them? One person's freedom cannot mean another's subjugation.
Now we move to the fourth point. Once again, the pro-choice side will select the topic and initiate the first round.
For the fourth point, I choose consequences of criminalizing abortion. Criminalizing abortion does not prevent it from happening. It simply forces it underground, exposing women, especially those who are poor, to unnecessary risks. According to the World Health Organization, countries with restrictive abortion laws have higher rates of unsafe procedures, leading to severe complications like hemorrhaging, infections, and, in many cases, death. Furthermore, criminalization reinforces social inequalities. Wealthy women can afford safe, discreet abortions in private clinics or travel to countries where it is legal. Poor women, on the other hand, are forced to resort to unsafe methods, putting their lives at risk. This reality creates a system where access to life and healthcare is dictated by financial privilege. And beyond the physical risks, women who survive unsafe abortions often face criminal prosecution, adding legal and psychological trauma to an already devastating experience. Criminalization does not solve the issue, it only makes it crueler and more unequal. If we truly want to protect lives, we must prioritize the safety and dignity of the women who are already here.
You argue that criminalization drives abortion underground, but that is not a valid reason for legalization. By that logic, we should legalize robbery to prevent violent thefts. Saying that wealthy women can afford safe abortions is a fair criticism, but it reflects a failure of the system, not of criminalization itself. The solution is not to make abortion equally accessible, it is to provide support so that no woman, rich or poor, feels abortion is her only option. Legalizing abortion is often presented as a practical solution, but in reality, it is an abdication of greater responsibilities. It is easier to allow abortion than to invest in structural solutions such as financial assistance for vulnerable mothers, comprehensive sex education, and universal access to effective contraceptive methods. Moreover, when abortion is seen as an easy solution, it can weaken collective responsibility. If the mentality of, "I don't need to be careful because I can just have an abortion" becomes widespread, it fosters a culture of recklessness regarding sexual and reproductive health. This does not only normalize abortion but also perpetuates cycles of social irresponsibility, diverting focus from effective and lasting preventive policies.
Comparing abortion to decriminalizing theft is an absurd analogy. Robbery actively and intentionally violates someone else's rights, whereas abortion is a deeply personal decision, often made under complex and painful circumstances. And about ensuring no woman feels abortion is her only option. That sounds nice, but where is this support you speak of? It is an empty promise that, in practice, never materializes. How many women in rural areas or impoverished neighborhoods have access to effective contraceptives, to doctors who provide guidance, to quality sex education and a real support network? Unfortunately, none of these things are a priority. If the system already fails to provide basic healthcare and education for millions, how can it possibly offer comprehensive support to women facing unwanted pregnancies? Until all women have access to these ideal solutions, what should they do? Should they simply accept and bear the physical, psychological, and financial burden of a flawed system that is yet to be fixed? And about the so-called normalization of abortion, no one, absolutely no one, treats abortion as something trivial or a casual decision. The women who choose it carry immense emotional weight, face social stigma, and in many cases endure physical risks. The idea that women opt for abortion out of convenience is a distorted caricature that disrespects the complexity of the decision.
You reject the analogy, but the point remains: legalizing abortion is treating the termination of a life as a solution to social problems. The comparison is not about the act itself, but about the flawed logic of legitimizing something simply because it happens clandestinely. You are correct in pointing out the lack of support for women, but using that as a justification for abortion is an acceptance of the system's failure. If we know there is a lack of sex education, contraception, and support networks, why are we not focusing on fixing those? Why is the answer always remove the problem instead of solve the causes? And about the normalization of abortion, no one is saying that women see abortion as an easy choice. But legalizing it as a practical solution does create a cultural shift where prevention and responsibility become secondary. Yes, abortion addresses some social and personal difficulties. But we must ask, is it truly right to solve these problems by eliminating a life? Are we willing to sacrifice the potential of a human being in exchange for quick fixes to challenges society refuses to confront? If the price we pay for certain immediate conveniences is the life of a developing human, then we are heading in the wrong direction.
Your concern about addressing the root causes is valid, but let's be realistic. As long as the system fails to provide sexual education, accessible contraceptives, and real support to women, these pregnancies will continue to happen. Abortion is not a bargaining chip, it is a practical measure in a world where ideal conditions still do not exist for many people. Now, regarding sacrificing the potential of a human being, let's return to the point we've already debated. A potential is not a life. A fetus in the early stages lacks consciousness, cannot feel pain, and does not interact with the world. We are trading the concrete life of a woman for a potential. You may think that legalizing abortion creates a culture of trivialization, leading to a more abortion-prone society, but thinking it is different from proving it. Countries where abortion is legalized have similar rates to places where it is highly restricted. Legalization is not an incentive, it is a practical solution. These countries heavily invest in sexual education, access to contraceptives, and support for women, preventing unwanted pregnancies before abortion even becomes an option. Banning abortion doesn't prevent it, it only makes it more dangerous and deadly, especially for poor women who lack access to safe resources and turn to illegal means.
This is where we disagree. The solution cannot be to address the consequences, but rather focus on the causes, especially when the consequences involve human lives. Abortion is a temporary measure, with an extremely high ethical cost, the end of a life. Yes, the system is flawed, and reaching ideal solutions is a huge challenge. But giving up on the best solution just because it is difficult turns us into a society that accepts shortcuts rather than fighting for what is right. Regarding the idea that potential is not a life, I disagree once again. The fetus is not just potential, but a developing life with unique DNA and an inherent future that, if uninterrupted, will naturally continue its course. Interrupting this process is neither natural nor ethical. As for the data on countries where abortion is legalized, their lower rates are not due to the legalization of abortion, but because they heavily invest in sexual education, contraceptives, and support for women. This is something you pointed out yourself. Before talking about legalization, we must ensure the basics that value life in all its forms. Allowing abortion without this would be like building a roof without a foundation. The real solution is to create a society that prevents the problem, instead of addressing it with short-term measures that are ethically questionable.
We have now reached the fifth and final point of the debate. This has been a long debate, so comment below, I made it to the fifth round, to let me know who's stuck with us until now. Following the logic, the side against abortion will choose the topic and start the first round.
For the fifth point, the topic chosen is psychological and emotional impacts of abortion. There is much talk about a woman's right to choose abortion, but little discussion about the psychological impact of this decision. Studies show that many women who undergo abortions experience deep feelings of guilt, regret, depression, and even post-traumatic stress disorder. According to a study published in the British Journal of Psychiatry, women who had abortions had an 81% higher risk of developing mental health issues compared to those who did not have abortions. Furthermore, abortion is presented as a free and autonomous choice of the woman, but we overlook one crucial factor: social pressure. Partners may pressure them to abort to avoid paternal responsibilities. Families may push them in this direction to avoid shame or financial difficulties. Employers may create an environment where pregnancy is seen as an obstacle to career advancement, subtly encouraging them to terminate the pregnancy. In a society that sees abortion as an easy and accessible option, it may become the expected exit rather than a genuine decision made by the woman.
Yes, there are psychological impacts of abortion, just as there are psychological impacts of forced motherhood. Women who are forced to carry an unwanted pregnancy may suffer from severe postpartum depression, deep psychological trauma, and even develop a rejection of their own child. If we are going to talk about mental health, then we need to discuss all the impacts, not just those that serve to demonize abortion and strengthen your viewpoint. Also, the research you mention has serious criticisms from experts who point out methodological flaws and bias in data selection. Peer-reviewed studies like those from the WHO show that abortion does not increase the risk of mental disorders in women who had no prior history of psychological issues. And yes, social pressure exists, but that is not an argument against abortion. It is an argument against a society that does not respect women's decisions. Just as some women may be pressured to abort, others may be pressured to carry an unwanted pregnancy to term. The point is that each woman lives a different reality. Some may regret the abortion, others may feel relieved, but what truly impacts mental health is not being able to choose which path to take.
You argue that forced motherhood also has psychological impacts. And that's true. But there's a fundamental difference. A woman who carries the pregnancy to term has options, adoption, family support, assistance networks. On the other hand, the aborted fetus has no options. It is a mistake to treat both situations as equivalent when one results in the irreversible end of a life. As for the criticisms of the British Journal of Psychiatry study, the same can be said about the studies you reference. Many are questioned by experts, as several of these studies on the topic are funded by pro-abortion organizations. It is curious how any study that points to problems with abortion is immediately questioned, while studies that favor its legalization are accepted without the same scrutiny. The fact is that there are indeed women who suffer trauma after an abortion. Ignoring these reports just because they don't fit a favorable narrative is a selective way of dealing with science. And regarding social pressure, I agree it is a reflection of a society that oppresses women, but abortion does not resolve this oppression. It reinforces it. It facilitates male irresponsibility and makes pregnancy a problem that can be solved. This is not freedom, it's coercion.
As if the system didn't already fail to provide the basics for those in need, your argument assumes an ideal world that simply does not exist. Meanwhile, the women most affected by the criminalization of abortion are the poorest and most vulnerable, facing a system that fails them before, during, and after pregnancy. In an ideal world, no woman would need an abortion because of lack of alternatives. But while the support you advocate does not exist in the reality of millions, denying the choice is simply turning the female body into a prison. And regarding questionable studies, what do you suggest we do? Should we disregard all studies because some are funded by pro-abortion organizations? That would be the same as discarding any anti-abortion research because it was funded by religious or conservative groups. What matters is scientific consensus. And today, that consensus points to abortion not increasing the risk of mental disorders in women without a prior psychological history.
The world is far from ideal, and no one denies that. But since when is the answer to a flawed system simply to eliminate lives? Saying that adoption is emotionally difficult doesn't change the fact that it allows the child to live. Saying that social support is lacking doesn't mean we should give up on seeking real solutions. Abortion does not resolve poverty, it does not create social assistance, and it does not grant more rights to women. It simply erases life before it even has the chance to begin. Saying that denying abortion turns the female body into a prison is a complete distortion of reality. Biologically, the female body generates life. This is not an imposition, it's a fact. And regarding scientific consensus, there is no single unchangeable truth. There are numerous studies showing the psychological impacts of abortion, but they are ignored because they don't fit the dominant narrative. If we want to talk about science, let's consider all research, not just those that serve your narrative.
If abortion doesn't solve poverty, doesn't create social assistance, and doesn't give women more rights, then does criminalization solve it? Because what we know is that banning abortion only makes women's lives harder, increases inequality, and exposes thousands to unnecessary risks. We aren't talking about an ideal world, we're talking about the real world, where a woman who can't abort doesn't receive magical support from the state or society. She receives an overwhelming burden, often without choice. Regarding the female body, yes, biologically it generates life, but biology is not a sentence. If it were, we wouldn't have life-saving surgeries, medical treatments that challenge the natural course of things, or medications to treat diseases. Medicine exists precisely so that we are not prisoners of biology. We have the technology and knowledge to allow people to have control over their bodies and their lives. This is called progress. Arguing that women should simply accept pregnancy because it's a biological fact reduces human beings to a reproductive mechanism and ignores centuries of scientific and ethical advancements.
Well, we've now covered all the main points, and to close the debate, each side will have up to 3.5 minutes for their final arguments. The pro-abortion side will start.
First of all, I thank you for the opportunity to participate in this debate. This discussion is not just about philosophical or political arguments, but about real lives, about women who face impossible decisions every day. The other side relies largely on emotional arguments. Statements like the fetus is not to blame, every life deserves a chance, or what if it were your child are emotionally impactful, but they don't address the practical reality of the women in these situations. Criminalizing abortion is based on the idea that emotion should take precedence over autonomy, but legislating based on emotion rather than facts and rights always leads to injustice. And the greatest injustice here is ignoring the real suffering of real women, who are treated as criminals for wanting to decide what happens to their own bodies. Throughout this debate, we've heard a lot about the fetus is not to blame, every life has value, and what if science is wrong? But the essential question remains, why is a woman's right to decide about her own body always placed second? Why are her suffering, her freedom, and her future treated as less important than a fetus that depends on her to exist? Banning abortion doesn't create more happy families. It creates more suffering, more abandonment, more misery, and more women trapped in lives they didn't choose. What I've advocated here is not that abortion should be encouraged, but that it should be an option, because a just society does not impose unnecessary suffering on women, does not force a raped girl to carry her rapist's child, does not force a woman to carry a fetus that has no chance of surviving. The woman's life already exists, and her autonomy should come first. The fetus is 100% dependent on her body, and no one has the right to force her to continue that pregnancy against her will. If we accept exceptions for extreme cases, then we already recognize that there are moments when ending the pregnancy is justified. So the real question is not whether abortion should exist, but who has the right to decide when it should happen. And that decision should be entirely in the hands of the woman herself. Yes, abortion is a difficult choice, but for many, not having it as an option is even worse. Legalizing abortion doesn't mean forcing anyone to undergo it. It means ensuring that those who need it can do so safely, with dignity and respect. Therefore, I truly believe abortion should be legalized because no one but the woman herself should decide what happens to her body. The truth is that abortion has always existed, and it always will. The choice we face is not between abortion or no abortion, but between safe abortion or illegal abortion. Denying this reality is not morality, it's negligence. What we're asking is not for anyone to be forced to abort, but for no one to be forced to gestate, because justice means looking at the world as it really is and recognizing that each woman, and only she, should decide about her own body.
I want to thank everyone who followed this debate because discussing such a sensitive and complex topic requires maturity and reflection. I know this is not a simple matter, and I know there are real pain and challenges involved, but that is exactly why I believe we must face it with honesty, without seeking shortcuts that lead to immediate but morally problematic solutions. From the beginning, I have defended a clear principle. Every human life has value and deserves protection, regardless of the circumstances of its conception or development. My goal here was not just to present a point of view, but to show that abortion is neither an ethical nor a sustainable solution to the problems we face. It doesn't solve inequality, doesn't empower women, and doesn't erase difficult circumstances. It simply ends a life that hasn't had the chance to exist. Throughout this debate, we've seen how pro-abortion arguments constantly need to redefine boundaries to justify it. First, they say there is no consciousness. Then they say there's no viability. Next, they argue there is no suffering. But in the end, even abortion advocates must face the reality. There is a life there, and no justification can change that. At some point, everyone faces the same dilemma. How can we determine which lives deserve protection and which can be interrupted? The truth is that humanity has always tried to justify the unjustifiable at certain points in history. There were times when it was argued that certain people had no full rights because of their race, origin, or social condition. Today, we are facing a new moral frontier, where we determine the value of life based on external and temporary circumstances. Abortion not only allows us to eliminate developing lives, but it creates a society where some lives are treated as disposable before they even begin. Talking about rights is essential, but ignoring that there is more than one life at stake is a mistake. The argument that a woman owns her body ignores the fact that the fetus is not part of the mother's body. It has unique DNA, its own life cycle, and if not interrupted, it will be born like any one of us. A woman's right to her body ends when it directly impacts the existence of another human being. Furthermore, we've talked about how science still doesn't have absolute certainties about consciousness, pain perception, and fetal development. If we are uncertain, shouldn't we err on the side of caution? Doubt should lead us to protect life even more, not eliminate it based on a convenient assumption. Therefore, I truly believe that abortion is not a solution, but the result of social problems that should not exist. The real answer lies in empowering women, providing support, education, and opportunities so that none of them feel that ending a life is the only way out. If we want a just society, we must start by protecting the most defenseless. And no one is more defenseless than a human being in gestation. Thank you.
Well, that's it. Closing another debate. It was a long but also very informative discussion. If you made it to the end, leave a comment below and share your suggestions for future debates. Let's see how many people watched until the end. Also, share your opinion on this topic. I've already said that I always read all the comments, and I love to see your thoughts. Who do you think did better? Which side do you think won, or which side do you think is right? It's great to discuss such delicate and complex issues here in the comments, but of course, always with respect. Oh, and last but not least, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Also, share this video so that this content and information reach more people. That's it. Thank you so much for your attention, and see you next time.